Ciao a tutti and welcome back to my channel. In this video we're going to talk about reflexive verbs. Reflexive verbs for more advanced students. That means that if you are getting started with reflexive verbs or you're not sure or you just know the present tense, this video is not for you. Make sure to check the other video where I talk about the basics of reflexive verbs. Today in this video instead we're going to take a look at reflexive verbs combined with other things. So for example, we're going to see how reflexive verbs behave with other tenses other than the present. We're going to see the imperativo, the passato prossimo, and especially how they work with modal verbs. Also, I would like to remind you that this video is divided in 3 sections and you can skip them here in the bar below, which means that we will have a story first for context, and then we will have grammar bites, and then eventually the last part will be a little practice along with me. So, pronti per cominciare? Ready to begin? So this is our story, and it is about a 17-year-old girl who just switched schools and she's a bit out of place. So we will read it in Italian. You can read along with me. Otherwise, you can just listen to the story, pause it if you want to reread it by yourself, because later on I will translate it into English. Also, while we're reading, keep in mind that the bolded verbs are all reflexive verbs in various tenses. Okay, so keep that in mind and we'll analyze them later in the grammar bites. Let's go. Quando avevo 17 anni, ci siamo trasferiti in una nuova città. A scuola non conoscevo nessuno, naturalmente, e in classe mi sedevo sempre in fondo e a ricreazione mi nascondevo in bagno. Il primo giorno di scuola la professoressa mi ha indicata e ha detto: tu, ragazza nuova, alzati, presentati e non ti dimenticare di dire da dove vieni. Ero così in imbarazzo che per un momento mi sono dimenticata tutto, perfino il mio nome. Mi volevo mettere a piangere, ma mi sono detta: Sara, questo è il tuo ultimo anno di liceo, dovresti divertirti. Ho fatto un respiro profondo, mi sono presentata e quando finalmente mi sono potuta sedere di nuovo al mio posto, la mia vicina di banco mi ha sorriso e ha sussurrato: finalmente non sono più io quella nuova. If you would like to save the story, you can screenshot the next slide coming up. You can save it and look at it later. When I was 17, we moved to a new city. At school, I didn't know anybody, obviously, and so in class, I used to sit always in the back, and during recess, I would hide in the restroom. On my first day of school, the teacher pointed at me and said, "You, new girl, stand up, introduce yourself, and don't forget to say, where are you from?" I was so embarrassed that for a moment, I forgot everything, even my own name. I wanted to start crying, but I told myself, Sarah, this is your last year of high school. You should have fun. So I took a deep breath, I introduced myself, and when finally I was able to sit back again at my seat, at my spot, my desk neighbor, or the girl sitting next to me, smiled at me and whispered, finally, I am not the new one anymore. Welcome to the Grammar Bites section of this video. So let's take a look and recap of how reflexive verbs behave, and especially let's take a look at how they behave with other tenses. If you remember in the previous video, we talked about the construction. So we have first a pronoun and then the verb. And the most important thing that we said is that the pronoun and the verb, they always match, right? So for example, mi for io, lavo. Io lavo, mi lavo. So they are always matching. And this construction, so first pronoun, then verb, both matching, we can see it throughout our story because this is the basic construction of reflexive verbs. For example, let's bring back our story. We have mi sedevo, mi nascondevo. Do you see how they end in O? Because it's io nascondevo, io sedevo, and mi. They're matching. So This is a very important distinction if you have to figure out whether or not is a reflexive verb, because if we look at the story again, look at this sentence here. Mi ha sorriso. If you take a look at ha sorriso, is it io ho, tu hai, lui o lei ha sorriso. So this is a third person, but it's me. Do you see how it's not matching? That means it is not a reflexive verb. Okay, she smiled to me. Not reflexive. Ha sorriso, me, to me, a me. So this is the most important thing about reflexive verb. The verb always match with the pronoun. And this is true not only in the imperfetto as we've seen, but in every tense. We can say, for example, in the conditional, mi nasconderei. Nasconderei is still conditional. We just put the me in front, that it's the right pronoun, the matching pronoun. So again, the structure is pronoun and verb in every possible tense. Technically not in every single possible tense, and in this video we're going to see all the examples. Actually, they're all already in the story. Let's take a look now at what the professor, the teacher, says to the girl. The teacher gives commands, orders, and this is the imperative form. The teacher says, alzati, presentati, e non ti dimenticare di. So get up, introduce yourself, and don't forget to something. The imperative is the only tense in which the pronoun, we said that it goes first and then second, the verb, in which the pronoun goes right after. So it moves to after the verb and it's attached. This is the only situation. I know if you are a little bit familiar with reflexive verbs, I see you're in your head going like, no, wait, Martina, I know that there are more exceptions. Yes, there are exceptions, but this, the imperativo, is the only tense in which you must put the pronoun at the end. So, alza, tu alza, alzati, presentati. Or simply, when we wish to someone to have fun on their vacation, we say divertiti, divertiti. So, with the imperative, when you give orders, always at the end. And so you might ask now, well, it says non ti dimenticare, and this is because it's the negative imperative. It is the imperative would be dimenticati, dimenticati. But because it's a negative, with the negative, you kind of like unlock the positioning. So you could say non ti dimenticare or non dimenticarti. So you have a bit of a free range if it's a negative order. But if it's a positive, always at the end. All right, so let's move on with our story analysis and take a look at reflexive verbs with the passato prossimo. This is probably the most complex structure because there are many things to remember at once. It's not difficult, but it's just laborious to come up with it spontaneously in a conversation. Okay, so let's take a look at the structure and how to build reflexive verbs in the passato prossimo. To make it easier, let's bring back our story. She says, mi sono dimenticata, mi sono detta. So here we can immediately see two things. First, essere. Reflexive verbs always want essere. So if you're speaking in the passato prossimo and a reflexive verb comes up, you don't even have to think about it, you just go with essere. Mi sono alzata, mi sono divertita, mi sono cambiata, mi sono messa un vestito, mi sono lavata i denti e mi sono spazzolata i capelli. I could go on forever. So there is another thing that popped up from this list. Not only the verb sono, but also the a at the end. And this is because you know that in the passato prossimo, when there is essere, you want the agreement. So because it's Martina speaking, mi sono alzata, mi sono vestita, mi sono divertita, mi sono detta. If it's Mario, mi sono divertito, detto, etc., etc. If it's Martina e Giulia, divertite, dette, etc. So they want the agreement at the end. We have a perfect example of the agreement in the plural. In the very first sentence of our story, ci siamo trasferiti. So as you can see, the construction is always the same. So it's not difficult, the passato prossimo. All you really have to remember is to agree the last letter. So ci, our pronoun goes first. Siamo, because it's noi. Divertiti, agreement. Ci siamo divertiti. And again, we have another example, mi sono presentata. because the one telling the story is a girl. Mi sono presentata. All right, so let's talk about the last thing, the Achilles heel of every student I have encountered in my career, which is modal verbs with the reflexive verbs, possibly also with the passato prossimo. What a great combination. Just to refresh, modal verbs are dovere, potere, volere, which in English are can, want to, and have to. So these three verbs are extremely helpful in expressing what you want to do, what you have to do, what you can do, etc. So very important to know how to use them. But with reflexive verbs, with the passato prossimo, things change. So let's take a look at our story. We have this very embarrassing moment when the girl almost wants to cry. Mi volevo mettere a piangere. A handful. But if you break it down and really pay attention to how the structure goes, it's fairly simple. The regular structure of reflexive verbs is pronouns and verb matching, right? Well, with modal verbs, it's like a sandwich. Pronoun, verb, and in the middle, you put the modal verb. In this case, volevo. Now, don't be confused, don't be sidetracked by this series of verbs like volevo, mettere, piangere, so many things. One thing that I would like to highlight for you is this. Verbs in Italian cannot be in groups of more than two, meaning that if you have three verbs, one after the other, the chances are that the third has a preposition, like in this case, a piangere, to introduce the second infinitive. Because you can't say mi volevo mettere piangere. You need some kind of padding in between the two. But that's for another video. Today, instead, we're going to focus on that modal. Mi volevo, io volevo mettere. So the matching part between the pronoun and the verb goes to the modal, volevo, and the verb itself stays in the infinitive, mettere. Okay, mi volevo mettere. The thing is, modal verbs are particularly tricky with reflexive verbs because they allow a repositioning. And I said before that the only ones that really you must put it at the end are the verbs in the imperative, right? When you give orders. But with modal verbs, they say, well, with us, you can do whatever you want. You can put it before the standard position, mi volevo mettere, or that mi, the pronoun, can go all the way at the end. So, volevo, that doesn't change, volevo mettermi. And in our story, you can see it when she talks to herself. She gives her the little pep talk and says, well, you should have fun. Dovresti divertirti. Could have been just as fine to say, ti dovresti divertire. Okay, so these are the two options. Dovresti divertirti and or ti dovresti divertire. Never in the middle. Never. Dovresti ti divertire doesn't work. Okay, so this is how they work with modal verbs. So now let's add an additional level of difficulty. What happens if we combine, say, the passato prossimo with modal verbs? Okay, so let's recap and boil it down to the bare minimum. In the story, we have the sentence mi sono potuta sedere. Really long. So, mi sono potuta sedere. What happens is basically we're just adding building blocks. Mi, always first position. Mi sono potuta, that's the agreement. And then you add sedere at the end. Okay, mi sono potuta sedere. But because we said that the reflexive verb are those that are kind of a free range, we can go before, we can go after the verb, etc. Something really peculiar happens at this point. And this is like an extremely peculiar situation, but I want to give you all the exceptions so that you can confidently read and assess your own reflexive verbs in the stories or in whatever you're reading. In a situation where we have a reflexive verb combined with a modal verb and in the passato prossimo, this is like stars aligning. But if we have this situation, if the pronoun goes all the way at the end, so joins the infinitive, then what happens is that the auxiliary is not essere, which is 99.9% of the time with reflexive verbs. It's not essere anymore, but it's avere. that mi goes at the end and you say, for example, ho dovuto sedermi. So this is the only case in which reflexive verbs want avere as an auxiliary. Ho dovuto sedermi vicino a that stinky classmate that I don't like. All right, this video was so full with stuff that I feel really bad sending you home without any practice. So stay with me until the end to put everything that we have learned into practice. If you have any doubt, feel free to come back to this video because I know it's jam-packed with information, and so taking it all in at once, it's a little bit overwhelming. So don't worry, but now time to practice. I'll see you at the end of the video. Com'è andata? How did the practice go? Let me know in the comments. And if you have any questions, anything that is not clear about this video, if you have any examples that pop up and you're not really sure of where to place them, on how to analyze them, or you don't really understand, just let me know in the comments and I'll be glad to help you. And overall, even if it was a grammar video, I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to hear more Italian and more Italian content, you can also follow me on Instagram, where I talk every day about Italy, Italian, the language, the culture, and a bit of personal life. Otherwise, I will see you here in the next video. A presto! Ciao! Non c'ho voce. Anna did. I'm so sorry. Oh, che sorry. C'ho l'occhio. Okay. My eye. Okay.